Hey guys, tonight we find ourselves gently swaying on the deck of a Viking longship. Feel that gentle rocking beneath your feet, the creak of wooden planks and ropes whispering against each other as the ship moves with the waves. A cool breeze brushes softly against your cheek, carrying with it the salty tang of the open sea. Above you, a velvety blanket of night stars spreads out, twinkling lazily as if they too are slowly drifting off to sleep. Tonight's journey might sound like a grand adventure, but honestly, you probably wouldn't survive the real thing. Just imagine weeks on a creaky wooden boat eating stale bread-salted fish and no Netflix to pass the time. Terrifying, right? So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you are and what the local time is. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're aboard a Norse ship, a Nar, if we want to get technical about it, but let's keep things relaxed. The Nar isn't one of those intimidating war vessels with dragon heads carved into the prow. No, this one is more like the minivan of Viking ships, practical, dependable, but hardly flashy. It's built for steady journeys and loaded up with supplies, merchandise, and maybe a few grumbling sailors wondering why they ever left home. Tonight, the sea is mercifully calm, allowing you to relax into the soothing rhythm of gentle waves lapping against the hull. If you're lucky, you might see the silvery flashes of fish beneath the moonlit surface, darting away from the ship's shadow, perhaps suspecting correctly that someone on board is already wondering how they'll taste smoked over a cozy fire. And speaking of taste, let's not kid ourselves, life aboard a Viking vessel isn't exactly a culinary delight. Meals mostly consist of dried fish, hard bread, and the occasional bite of cheese if you're lucky. Sure, no one expects Michelin stars here, but you might daydream about fresh fruit after a few weeks at sea. But tonight, let's keep your mind off food. Instead, enjoy the sensation of gently bobbing along under starlit skies. With no artificial lights, the heavens above you seem endless stars, visible in numbers you never thought possible, each tiny spark feeling as though it's winking directly at you. There's a comforting quiet to sea travel, broken only by the rhythmic splash of oars, or the occasional murmured conversation from sailors passing the long, slow hours. Someone quietly jokes that the sky tonight is so clear, Odin himself might get lost counting stars. Historians still argue whether these journeys were seen by Vikings as epic adventures or simply a way of life. But on nights like this, it's easy to imagine Vikings might have appreciated the simple joys of calm waters and clear skies just as much as any modern traveler. It's tempting to romanticize their voyages, picturing mighty warriors heroically scanning the horizon for undiscovered lands. But let's be honest, they were probably bored out of their minds most of the time. After all, there's only so many stories you can tell, and so many rounds of I Spy you can play using only ocean water stars and clouds as reference points. You might wonder how a culture famed for raids and fierce battles also excelled in leisurely sailing across vast empty seas. Truth is, Vikings were excellent planners and meticulous sailors, far more concerned with safety and survival than Hollywood movies like to depict. They even carried games aboard ships to pass the tedious hours, dice carved from bones or wood-simple board games etched onto deck planks. Perhaps you'd find yourself gently nodding off to the sound of sailors rolling dice across worn planks, the soft tapping echoing rhythmically with the waves. And while tonight's trip feels like a leisurely cruise, the Vikings aboard this humble Nar have no idea they're slowly drifting towards something monumental, a discovery that will quietly rewrite history long before Columbus would ever mistakenly think he'd landed in India. Vikings, completely unaware of the historical gravity of their sleepy voyage, casually sail toward a continent yet unnamed by Europeans. Picture yourself nestled among rolled-up furs and woven blankets, feeling the occasional cool mist of sea spray on your face. Around you, the creak and groan of wood mingles with hushed voices speaking Old Norse, a language that sounds vaguely poetic, even in casual conversation. You might overhear a gentle debate among sailors about whether Thor is causing this unusually calm weather, or if perhaps the gods have simply decided to give them a rare break. Speaking of gods, the Vikings on board have their own cozy rituals. They They often pause to make small offerings to the sea, quietly dropping tokens of gratitude or whispered prayers into the gentle waters below. These tiny rituals serve as comforting reminders that even seasoned sailors feel vulnerable in the vastness of the ocean and seek protection through gentle acts of faith. Maybe you silently join in whispering your own quiet hopes, like wishing for just a bit more cheese at tomorrow's meal. As the night deepens, the crew's murmurs grow quieter, their movements slower, and one by one sailors drift off to sleep beneath heavy cloaks and warm furs. The watchman stands quietly at the bow, more dreamily than alertly scanning the horizon. His job tonight is an easy one. The seas are peaceful and the wind is gentle. Even the ocean seems to encourage restfulness, offering no reason to disturb the soft dreams aboard this Nar. Let yourself drift further into relaxation, lulled by the gentle waves, the salty air, and the thought of sailors gently sleeping unknowingly, sailing towards history. You're floating calmly now, just on the edge of sleep, gently cradled by the North Atlantic, slowly drifting towards tomorrow, towards discovery. The ship continues gliding gently over calm seas, and by now, you're comfortably settled into the slow rhythm of ocean travel. The quiet creak of wood beneath your head and the soft rush of waves become like a lullaby. But even the most peaceful Viking voyages needed navigation. Without modern maps or GPS, how exactly do these sturdy Norse sailors find their way across endless stretches of open sea? Well, tonight let's drift gently into the curious world of Viking navigation, where stars, ravens, and some surprisingly clever methods come into play. You see, the Vikings might not have had compasses or sextants, but they certainly didn't just blindly wander around. Instead, they relied on nature itself. Stars overhead, patterns of waves, even the flight of birds to quietly steer their ships toward distant shores. Above you, the constellations twinkle calmly in a night sky so clear you can almost reach out and touch them. For Vikings, these stars weren't merely pretty lights to admire, they were precise celestial road signs. The North Star Polaris remains a faithful companion fixed steadily in the northern sky, always pointing northward, reliable as your grandma's old analog clock. Even in this sleepy age, the Vikings knew to glance upward, measure their progress against these celestial landmarks, and keep their vessels steadily on course. But stars alone couldn't always guarantee a smooth trip. Imagine yourself sailing through foggy days when the sun and stars are hidden behind layers of mist thicker than a woolen sweater in winter. This is where Vikings gently introduced a clever trick. They used ravens to guide them. Yes, ravens, those intelligent, mischievous birds, famously favored by Odin himself. Each long ship carried at least one raven, often more securely housed in wooden cages. When Vikings believed they were close to land but weren't sure exactly how close, they'd release one raven. If the bird saw land, it would naturally fly straight toward it, excited at the prospect of fresh trees and perhaps fewer salty snacks. However, if the raven circled, uncertainly returned to the ship, or even decided to perch back on the mast, sailors knew they'd have to sail a bit further before attempting another bird-based test. Just imagine the gentle comedy of this scenario, seasoned Norse warriors' helmets and axes at the ready, solemnly releasing ravens like mystical compasses. Picture a raven staring accusingly at its handler as if asking, "Really again? Haven't you people learned how to find land by yourselves yet?" But jokes aside, this method was surprisingly effective. Vikings trusted their feathered friends implicitly, even if historians still argue whether ravens ever mischievously led them astray. Another quirky tool Vikings might have used, though it's debated among historians, is the so-called sunstone, a crystal that polarizes light, making it possible to detect the sun's location even on cloudy days. Imagine sailors squinting gently through this translucent stone, softly tilting it patiently, seeking that telltale glint guiding them westward or northward. Today, scholars quietly debate whether sunstones were widespread navigational aids or simply an intriguing myth. But it's comforting to think Vikings might have calmly gazed through these crystals, relying on delicate beams of sunlight, filtering gently through fog. As your ship continues drifting under the starlit skies, the sailors quietly prepare another navigational trick, this one involving simply observing the ocean itself. Skilled Norse navigators could read the patterns and colors of the waves, determining proximity to land based on subtle clues. The deep blue of the open ocean gradually shifts into shallower greens and blues as you approach shorelines, and the presence of seabirds diving for fish hinted at islands and coastlines nearby. And let's not forget the clouds gently drifting overhead, soft, fluffy signposts. Vikings also took seriously. Land masses often generated specific cloud formations. A distant island or coast could create low-lying clouds gently hovering, appearing like nature's quiet welcome sign. Sailors knew to interpret these clouds, smiling gently at their good fortune as they adjusted their sails and steered confidently toward hidden shores. So, as you drift tonight, comforted by the waves, you might feel a gentle sense of wonder. Here are these fierce warriors renowned for their raids and battles, calmly whispering encouragement to ravens, staring hopefully at crystals, and squinting at clouds as if deciphering nature's softest poetry. It almost feels romantic, doesn't it? Perhaps this is the quietly humorous reality Vikings. The fearless explorers might occasionally look less like legendary heroes and more like gently bewildered travelers relying on bird brains and cloudy skies to reach new lands. But as you sway with the ship's gentle motion, it feels perfectly natural. After all, humans have always found creative, sometimes amusing ways to navigate the unknown. Long before smartphones and satellites, our ancestors gazed upward, outward, even downward, trusting stars, birds, and waves. Maybe you'd smile, feeling quietly connected to these ancient sailors, sharing the timeless joy and occasional frustration of wondering, are we there yet? Tonight, however, your own journey aboard this ship remains easy. There's no real urgency, no storms to test your patience, only gentle waves and a cool, calming breeze. The stars shine steadily above ravens, softly croak in their cages, and the sailors whisper reassuring jokes, softly poking fun at each other's navigational guesses. You drift closer to sleep, comforted by this ancient companionship. Historians continue debating just how far and how accurately the Vikings navigated these uncharted waters. Still, one fact remains comfortably clear: they reached distant lands long before most Europeans even dreamed such places existed. Soon, one particular group of Vikings sailing gently westward would stumble onto an entirely new continent, blissfully unaware of how their sleepy voyage would reshape history. But for now, let's enjoy the quiet simplicity of this night, the sailors' whispered discussions, and the soft croaks of ravens awaiting their turn at navigational duty. Feel yourself relax even more deeply, lulled gently by rhythmic waves and softly murmured jokes from sailors who have no idea they're about to accidentally discover America centuries before Columbus. Tonight, it's enough simply to drift along with them, gently navigating dreams. With the soft sway of your Viking gnar continuing under a sky speckled with stars, your mind drifts gently back to the origins of this voyage. As calming as the present journey is, it's impossible not to quietly chuckle at the story of how it all began, especially since the great Eric the Red, the man whose name evokes dramatic images of fierce conquest, is perhaps most famous for accidentally discovering Greenland after getting himself repeatedly banished. Yes, repeatedly. Imagine yourself in the harsh yet oddly charming environment of 10th century Iceland. Picture small villages nestled quietly between rugged hills and rocky shores, sheep grazing lazily, and the occasional volcanic eruption to keep everyone on their toes. Life here is simple, occasionally dramatic, and full of everyday routines, but for Eric the Red, it seemed annoyingly easy to get on the wrong side of neighbors and authorities. Some people have noisy dogs or loud music. Eric apparently had a talent for getting himself into trouble over and over again. You see, Eric Thorvaldsen, better known as Eric the Red, earned his nickname thanks to his fiery red hair and temper, not because of any dramatic military exploits. In fact, you could almost picture Eric as that neighbor who's constantly starting mildly irritating squabbles over fence lines, or whose goats refuse to respect property boundaries. Except Eric's disputes tended to escalate a bit further, unfortunately involving swords and axes rather than just angry notes left on doorsteps. After a few too many disputes, fights, Eric found himself politely asked to leave Iceland. Actually, it was less of a polite request and more of a formal banishment, but let's keep it gentle. With typical Viking pragmatism, he packed his bags and set sail, deciding to find new lands rather than dwell on past disagreements. Thus began Eric's accidental yet strangely relaxing adventure. You might picture Eric the Red dramatically steering his vessel toward unknown horizons, boldly aiming for greatness. But the truth is gently amusing, he didn't exactly set out to discover new lands. Instead, he simply needed somewhere to live, where his neighbors couldn't chase him off with torches and pitchforks. And as fate would have it, he ended up sailing westward, eventually stumbling upon the enormous chilly island now known as Greenland. Now, Greenland might sound lush and inviting, but here's the quietly humorous twist. It was anything but green. In fact, historians quietly debate whether Eric ever the subtle marketer named it Greenland as a sort of early medieval real estate tactic. After all, who wouldn't be more inclined to move to a place called Greenland instead of something brutally honest, like Icy Rock Island clever, right? Despite the misleading name, Eric genuinely saw potential. Sure, Greenland was mostly ice and rock, but tucked along the southern coast were narrow strips of genuinely green land, fertile enough to grow barley, raise sheep, and build settlements. He quickly returned to Iceland, enthusiastically describing this promising paradise to his countrymen, painting a picture so appealingly optimistic you'd almost forget he'd been banished in the first place. Eric managed to convince enough settlers, perhaps those equally annoyed with Icelandic neighbors, to sail back westward with him. Soon, Greenland had its first Norse communities. While life there certainly wasn't easy, winters colder than a penguin's freezer, and limited farmland, it provided a fresh start, a place free from past grudges and angry villagers. As you lie gently rocking aboard your current ship, it's amusing to consider that your peaceful voyage owes much to Eric's fiery temper and oddly convincing sales pitch. Without Eric's accidental discovery and persuasive marketing, future voyages, including the one you're comfortably drifting along tonight, might never have occurred. In a way, you owe your relaxing evening to Eric's frequent inability to peacefully resolve neighborly disputes. Of course, historians still debate the finer details, exactly how many fights Eric started, or whether his descriptions of Greenland were deliberately misleading or just cheerfully optimistic. Regardless, Eric's quiet legacy was significant. Greenland settlements flourished modestly, becoming stepping stones to further westward exploration, including the accidental discovery of North America by his son Leif Erikson years later. But let's pause for a moment to appreciate the gentle comedy. Here, Eric's fiery temper inadvertently led him to become one of history's more significant explorers entirely by accident. Imagine a modern equivalent, someone getting banned from their local coffee shop, driving off frustrated, only to accidentally discover a delightful new cafe down the road. It's comforting to know even legendary historical figures sometimes found themselves wandering into unexpected adventures purely because they had trouble getting along with others. As you drift quietly tonight, feel yourself gently amused by the thought of Eric settling into his new Greenland home. You might imagine him standing proudly on the shoreline, surveying his new territory, hands on Hip's hair, fluttering dramatically in the cold breeze. But maybe, just maybe, he also quietly chuckled at the irony expelled from one rocky island, only to land on another, larger, slightly colder one. Still, Greenland became Eric's sanctuary, a place where he could quietly farm fish and enjoy life without constantly checking over his shoulder for irritated neighbors. Settlers built farms, raised livestock, and traded peacefully with one another. And while their lives weren't luxurious, they found a quiet satisfaction in hard work, warm hearths, and the occasional storytelling session filled with tall tales about sea monsters, angry gods, and of course, Eric's legendary temper. Tonight, your ship gently moves westward, retracing the quiet paths first pioneered by Eric's accidental voyages. Without even meaning to, you're following in the wake of a man whose greatest achievement was sparked not by ambition or noble curiosity, but by simply being unable to get along with his neighbors. History, it seems, has a quietly ironic sense of humor. Let your eyes gently close, drifting comfortably closer to sleep as you reflect on Eric's story. Perhaps you smile softly, imagining how annoyed Eric would be to know his legacy includes a relaxing bedtime tale narrated centuries later. But maybe deep down, even the fiery-tempered Viking would appreciate being remembered, gently drifting along with you on a night voyage into peaceful dreams. With Eric the Red comfortably settled on his chilly new homeland, your journey tonight gently shifts to his son Leif Erikson. Now, Leif isn't exactly the fierce, conquering Viking you might imagine. No, he's more of the quiet, thoughtful type, perhaps even a bit prone to daydreaming. And tonight, as your ship glides gently over sleepy waves, it's easy to picture Leif staring absently at the horizon, accidentally charting history, simply because he wasn't paying close enough attention. Historians still argue whether Leif Erikson was intentionally exploring or simply got lost on his now famous journey to North America. Either way, the end result is gently amusing. The Viking, credited as the first European to set foot on America, wasn't deliberately seeking a new continent. He just kind of wandered into it. Imagine the gentle comedy, Leif Erikson, celebrated Viking hero, quietly scratching his head and muttering, "I don't remember turning left back there." Leif grew up under the shadow of his fiery father, Eric, and learned early on that sometimes it's easier to quietly smile and nod rather than argue. Unlike his hot-tempered dad, Leif approached life with a calm, laid-back charm, preferring gentle diplomacy over axes and shouting matches. But even calm, patient people can occasionally get a bit lost, especially when navigating the vast, featureless ocean without accurate maps or modern compasses. Your ship tonight mirrors Leif's own peaceful journey, a voyage marked not by fierce storms or dramatic battles, but rather by gentle breezes, playful dolphins occasionally surfacing, and quiet sailors whistling Old Norse tunes. As you drift along, let's imagine Leif's journey westward from Greenland, gently accompanied by crewmates, quietly joking about his suspiciously vague navigational instructions. After all, Leif's directions were basically sail west, keep an eye out, and let's just see what happens. Some scholars suggest Leif might have heard rumors of distant lands from earlier sailors, but even if he had, there was no clear sense of direction or detailed maps. Picture the sailors gently teasing him, asking if perhaps he'd navigated based on some vague notion that if we sail far enough west, we'll eventually bump into something interesting. And indeed, that's essentially what happened. After days of peaceful drifting, Leif and his crew finally spotted a promising shoreline ahead. Imagine their quiet excitement at discovering land after endless ocean vistas, trees, lush and green beaches inviting, and waters abundant with fish, leaping gently as if welcoming visitors. They made landfall in a place Leif would eventually name Vinland, inspired by the wild grapes found in the region. Yes, grapes perfectly suited for making wine. Who knew Vikings were secretly aspiring sommeliers? This quietly humorous twist adds to Leif's gentle legend. After all, discovering a new continent is one thing, but stumbling across prime vineyard real estate, now that's a pleasant surprise. Historians still debate exactly where Vinland was located. Some suggest Newfoundland, others point to Nova Scotia, but all agree it was lush, abundant, and inviting, especially compared to Greenland's frosty landscapes. Imagine Leif's peaceful bewilderment stepping ashore, breathing in the fresh, leafy scent, feeling soil soft beneath his feet, and quietly wondering if he'd accidentally stumbled into a paradise reserved for those who got slightly lost. This wasn't exactly fierce Viking conquest. It felt more like an idyllic weekend getaway. The crew immediately set about exploring their newfound paradise with the kind of gentle curiosity you'd have exploring an unexpectedly nice hotel room, discovering delightful amenities you hadn't anticipated, like plush robes or complimentary snacks. Indeed, Leif's Vinland exploration was filled with simple pleasures. They gathered grapes, berries, nuts, and enjoyed leisurely fishing trips. And while traditional Viking storytelling might emphasize heroic battles and fierce conquests, the reality here was gently mundane. A peaceful break from ocean monotony, with sailors laughing quietly around evening fires, probably joking about how nice it was to eat fresh fruit rather than dried fish for once. But the gentle comedy of Leif's discovery also included confusion about what exactly they'd found. Vinland was rich, fertile, and genuinely appealing. But was it just an island? Part of a larger continent? Leif and his crew had no way of knowing they'd stumbled upon the eastern coast of North America, a massive landmass stretching unimaginably far beyond their cozy campsite. They quietly wondered among themselves, gently speculating about how big this land might be, unaware they were literally standing at the edge of a continent whose sheer size would have astonished them. One particularly charming story from Leif's journey involves a crew member who wandered off and got lost, eventually finding his way back by following the distant sound of his companion's laughter. You might picture the gentle teasing around the fire, afterward Vikings playfully ribbing their shipmate about his poor sense of direction, unaware of the deeper irony that they'd all found this place due to their captain's equally questionable navigation. Tonight, comfortably nestled aboard your own gently swaying ship, it's easy to imagine yourself alongside Leif's crew, savoring their discoveries. You might smile sleepily at the thought of Vikings quietly debating whether the grapes were better for wine or simply eating fresh. After all, why rush decisions when you've just accidentally stumbled onto paradise? Historians continue to gently debate whether Leif fully understood the significance of his discovery. Did he realize the enormity of the continent he'd touched, or did he simply see it as another pleasant but temporary stopover? Whatever the case, his quiet legacy stands firm. Long before Columbus, Leif Erikson accidentally became the first European to explore North America, not through fierce conquest or dramatic intent, but simply through a relaxed, slightly absent-minded voyage westward. As your ship gently sails onward tonight, perhaps you appreciate Leif's journey for its simplicity. In an era marked by conquest and conflict, here was a quiet Viking adventure focused on grapes, gentle shores, and leisurely evenings spent around cozy campfires. Drift gently closer to sleep, comforted by this quiet thought. Sometimes history's greatest discoveries aren't made through fierce ambition, but through calm, gentle wandering, accidentally bumping into something wonderful. As your ship drifts onward under gently whispering stars, your thoughts softly move to the lush, inviting shores of Vinland. Imagine stepping quietly onto the coast, feeling the soft give of grass beneath your feet, and hearing birds chirping lazily as if welcoming you home. Despite its grand historical significance, Vinland's greatest charm wasn't its place in history books. It was simply the coziness and calm of daily Viking life unfolding in a peaceful paradise. The Vikings who arrived here quickly realized this new land offered everything Greenland did not: lush meadows, abundant trees, and gentle rolling hills, ideal for farming or simply lounging around. There was fresh fruit, clear streams, and a sense of peaceful abundance that probably had Vikings gently rubbing their eyes, wondering if they'd drifted into some sort of Norse afterlife reserved for particularly well-behaved warriors. Picture yourself quietly settling into their first encampment, a modest collection of tents and simple shelters nestled comfortably beneath towering trees. Everything about Vinland seemed softly inviting, from the morning mist drifting lazily through the trees to the cheerful splashes of fish leaping from sparkling streams. Life here felt less like pioneering adventure and more like an extended, deeply relaxing vacation. Historians still argue whether Vinland was primarily valued by Vikings for its practical benefits, abundant resources, fertile lands, or if its real appeal lay in the simple joy of discovering a peaceful refuge. One thing is clear: this wasn't the harsh, windswept environment Vikings were used to. Here, even fierce warriors quickly settled into gentler routines, enjoying the luxury of easy fishing, leisurely foraging, and occasional berry-picking sessions that probably resembled idyllic picnics more than rigorous expeditions. It's amusing to picture Vikings gently strolling through berry patches, stooping occasionally to pick a particularly ripe fruit, debating whether the blueberries or raspberries tasted sweeter. Back in Greenland or Iceland, fresh fruit was rare, a delicacy reserved for special occasions. But here in Vinland, berries were as plentiful as modern supermarket shelves, giving these hardened sailors a quietly comic realization that they might have sailed all this way just to indulge in what felt suspiciously like an extended culinary vacation. Fishing became a peaceful daily routine far removed from the dramatic, stormy voyages often depicted in Viking sagas. Instead, imagine lazy afternoons spent casting nets into calm waters, the only danger being mild sunburn from forgetting your wide-brimmed helmet at camp. And though Viking warriors were famed for their fearlessness here in Vinland, their fiercest confrontations were likely friendly arguments over whose fish was bigger or gently teasing a crewmate who repeatedly returned empty-handed. As days blended into weeks, the Vikings built more permanent structures, quietly crafting homes that reflected their newfound appreciation for comfort and tranquility. They constructed modest cabins from timber, harvested easily from surrounding forests, roofs gently covered in sod, to blend seamlessly into the landscape. Inside, simple wooden furniture offered restful comfort, and fire pits crackled softly, providing warmth and cozy companionship each evening. One of Vinland's quiet pleasures was the abundance of wild grapes growing naturally and seemingly everywhere. Vikings quickly learned that grapes weren't just delightful fresh, they could also be fermented into wine. Imagine yourself quietly sitting around a fire sipping sweet, freshly made wine, listening to sailors gently joking about their newfound passion for viticulture. Sure, Vikings loved their traditional ale, but wine felt wonderfully exotic, as though they'd discovered not just new land, but an entirely new way to unwind. Even the weather in Vinland felt gentle, welcoming these visitors with mild summers and softly snowy winters. Unlike Greenland's harsh climate, Vinland offered seasons so pleasantly balanced they might have felt suspiciously perfect, as though nature itself was gently encouraging Vikings to relax, settle down, and perhaps reconsider that whole raiding and pillaging lifestyle. Despite their fierce reputation, Vikings in Vinland likely enjoyed quieter, more reflective evenings than their relatives back home. Around flickering campfires beneath a velvety canopy of stars, they shared stories not just of fierce battles or stormy voyages, but simpler, gentler tales. They probably laughed quietly about minor mishaps like the crewmate who always seemed to misplace his fishing net, or softly teased one another over minor annoyances like whose snoring was loudest. Historians debate whether Vikings intended to create a permanent settlement here or simply treated Vinland as a peaceful getaway, a comfortable vacation spot providing respite from harsher northern climates. But whatever their intentions, it's clear that life in Vinland at least initially was cozy calm and surprisingly luxurious by Viking standards. As you drift along tonight aboard your gently swaying ship, let your mind comfortably wander through this quiet paradise. Feel yourself settling easily into Vinland's peaceful routines, savoring fresh berries, listening to crackling fires, and gently chuckling at friendly jokes shared among sailors. There's something comforting in imagining these fierce warriors enjoying simple pleasures, picking grapes, fishing leisurely quietly, observing deer grazing at dawn without reaching instinctively for weapons. The cozy meadows of Vinland weren't just a historical curiosity, they embodied a timeless truth that even the toughest adventurers occasionally seek calm, simple moments. Vikings, for all their bold exploits, knew to appreciate gentle afternoons spent beneath warm sun, lounging in lush grass, contentedly savoring fresh fruit and easy conversation. Tonight, gently rocking with the waves, perhaps you can understand the quiet appeal of Vinland. Your journey tonight mirrors theirs, not one of dramatic conquest, but one of calm discovery. Allow your thoughts to softly drift toward sleep, comforted by the image of Vinland's peaceful meadows, cozy firesides, and the gentle laughter of Vikings quietly amused by the unexpected luxury of grapes and sunshine. As your ship drifts steadily onward through the soothing night, imagine gently waking in the fresh morning air of Vinland, your senses softly greeted by sunlight filtering through leafy branches, birds singing lazily, and the faint aroma of something quietly promising breakfast. Today, we'll follow the Vikings as they navigate the charmingly mundane tasks of fishing and foraging, two activities that, despite their legendary toughness, they didn't always excel at. You might expect Vikings, legendary sailors, and fearsome warriors to be expert fishermen by nature. Yet the quiet humor of history tells a slightly different story, often filled with gentle mishaps and surprisingly inept attempts at catching dinner. Picture yourself at the shore, quietly observing Viking sailors casting nets confidently expecting impressive hauls, only to repeatedly pull in nothing more than clumps of seaweed, tangled lines, or perhaps the occasional boot, lost from their own boats. These gentle failures weren't uncommon, nor were they taken too seriously. Vikings, despite their fierce reputation, were excellent at self-deprecating humor. Historians suggest they often joked about their fishing misadventures, gently teasing the particularly unlucky fishermen who regularly returned to camp empty-handed. Perhaps one sailor famously earned the nickname Fishless Sven, becoming a legend around campfires not for fierce exploits, but for his comedic inability to catch even the slowest fish. But when Vikings did manage to fish successfully, they enjoyed an abundance of delicious, freshly caught seafood. Imagine savoring delicate trout grilled over open fires, or perhaps salmon gently smoked until it practically melts on your tongue. Meals in Vinland felt luxurious compared to Greenland's typical menu of dried fish and stale bread. And even Fishless Sven probably enjoyed occasional lucky days when fish practically jumped into his boat, perhaps out of pity. Foraging proved similarly amusing, though Vinland overflowed with berries, nuts, and herbs ripe for picking. Vikings occasionally experienced minor mishaps here as well. Imagine burly warriors cautiously examining unfamiliar berries, gently debating their edibility with careful skepticism, especially after one incident involving a crewmate who enthusiastically tasted a handful of attractive berries, only to discover they were shockingly bitter. This minor inconvenience quickly became legendary around campfires, with gentle teasing focused less on the bitterness of the berries and more on the hilariously disgusted expression that crewmate made afterward. Historians continue to gently debate exactly how skilled Vikings were at distinguishing edible from inedible plants. But one thing is clear, they approached the task with cautious enthusiasm. You can easily picture a group of sailors quietly standing around a bush, carefully consulting one another, gently daring someone else to try the first bite, an ancient Norse equivalent of rock, paper, scissors, deciding who would risk a questionable snack. Still, when foraging went well, and usually it did, the rewards were delightfully simple, yet satisfying. Imagine gathering wild raspberries, their tart sweetness bursting gently on your tongue, or plucking handfuls of blueberries, perfect for cooking into comforting porridges and simple desserts. These peaceful excursions transformed mundane tasks into gentle pleasures, providing opportunities for quiet conversation, leisurely exploration, and moments of quiet reflection under warm sunlight, filtering through leafy branches. Occasionally, Vikings even stumbled upon herbs or plants they found genuinely puzzling. Historians suggest they encountered unfamiliar North American species, quietly puzzling over plants they had no names for, softly debating their potential uses. Perhaps one sailor gently insisted that a certain leafy plant might cure headaches, while another joked it probably caused them instead. These playful debates around mysterious plants likely amused Vikings far more than fierce battles ever did. After all, who doesn't appreciate gentle comedy arising from minor confusion? Even hunting offered moments of quiet humor. Imagine burly warriors softly sneaking through meadows, hoping to capture rabbits or deer, only to accidentally startle their prey with an ill-timed sneeze or clumsy step. The quietly comical sight of fierce Norse warriors chasing startled rabbits, their armor jingling loudly, probably provided endless amusement back at camp. But despite these occasional comedic missteps, Vikings genuinely thrived in Vinland's abundance. Their efforts, fishing, foraging, and occasionally stumbling, provided plenty of nourishing meals and simple comforts. And it's quietly reassuring to know even legendary explorers occasionally found themselves humbled by everyday tasks. After all, few things humanize fierce warriors more gently than picturing them grumbling mildly after failing to catch dinner yet again. As your own ship continues gently rocking under starry skies, let your imagination softly wander to these simple Viking pleasures. Perhaps tonight's soothing journey feels like a gentle reminder. Sometimes history's greatest stories aren't epic battles or dramatic discoveries, but quiet moments spent laughing softly at everyday mishaps, savoring fresh fruit, and appreciating the simple joy of catching a single elusive fish. Let yourself drift comfortably closer to sleep, smiling gently at the thought of fishless Sven, forever immortalized by his comedic lack of fishing skills, or Vikings carefully debating the merits of suspicious berries. Your peaceful voyage tonight mirrors their gentle days, simple, charmingly mundane, and quietly fulfilling. Enjoy, drifting gently onward, comforted by the thought that even history's bravest explorers sometimes preferred quiet laughter, warm fires, and the gentle luxury of freshly gathered berries to grand adventures. Your ship glides onward beneath starlit skies, gently swaying like a cradle, rocking you toward sleep. Tonight, your thoughts softly drift to a curious moment in history, the Vikings' first peaceful encounters with the native peoples of Vinland. Now, history often loves dramatic, tense meetings between cultures, but the truth here is gentler, quieter, and occasionally amusingly awkward. Imagine waking up in your modest Viking camp, a soft morning breeze rustling leaves overhead, birds chirping lazily as if reluctant to begin their day. You're quietly going about your usual morning routine, perhaps carefully examining berries or gently sharpening a fishing hook, when suddenly through the morning mist you spot a group of unfamiliar figures quietly emerging from the trees. Vikings, known for their boldness, were suddenly unsure how to react cautiously, waving hello like awkward teenagers at their first school dance. Historians still debate exactly how these first meetings unfolded, but many believe they were initially peaceful, marked by curious but careful mutual observation. Picture two groups standing opposite each other, softly murmuring in entirely different languages, each cautiously trying to interpret the other's quiet gestures. It probably resembled a very polite game of charades, both sides smiling awkwardly while silently thinking, "What exactly is going on here?" The native peoples, likely the ancestors of the Mi'kmaq or Beothuk, observed these strange newcomers with gentle curiosity. Vikings, meanwhile, likely marveled quietly at the unfamiliar clothing tools and customs of their newfound neighbors. It's easy to picture Vikings discreetly nudging each other, whispering questions like, "Should we offer fish? Is that polite? Or should we wait for them to say something first?" Trade quickly became the simplest way to bridge the language gap. Picture the softly humorous sight of Vikings enthusiastically presenting random objects they thought might be valuable, perhaps chunks of iron, brightly colored cloth, or beads. Meanwhile, their native counterparts gently offered furs, expertly crafted tools, or freshly caught game, quietly amused, or perhaps politely bewildered by the strange objects offered in return. And then came the gentle comedy of misunderstanding moments where gestures or expressions led to quiet confusion. Imagine a Viking politely offering a piece of iron to a native individual who cautiously accepted it, smiling uncertainly, while silently wondering, "What exactly am I supposed to do with this heavy rock?" Meanwhile, the Viking cheerfully congratulated himself on a successful exchange, equally unaware he'd likely traded something valuable for something only slightly more useful than a decorative doorstop. These gentle misunderstandings became quiet tales retold around campfires, both sides amused by the charming awkwardness of their initial interactions. Historians still quietly debate the details, exactly who traded what and how much genuine communication occurred, but the overall picture remains softly appealing. Two groups cautiously bridging their differences through polite gestures, slightly awkward smiles, and carefully managed curiosity. Sometimes Vikings attempted to demonstrate their practical skills, perhaps showing how to sharpen iron tools or craft wooden objects. Imagine the quiet humor of a Viking proudly displaying how to use a newly forged axe, while their native counterparts politely nodded, secretly thinking, "We've been cutting trees just fine with our stone tools, thank you very much." Yet both sides gently appreciated the earnest attempts at communication, patiently enduring demonstrations they probably didn't need simply to encourage friendly relations. Likewise, native peoples showed Vikings how to navigate Vinland's lush forests, softly pointing out which berries to avoid and which paths led to the best fishing spots. Picture Vikings quietly nodding along, grateful but slightly embarrassed at how many previously eaten berries might have been questionable choices. Still, these gentle interactions fostered mutual respect, easing fears and building cautious but genuine friendships. Occasionally, these encounters might have involved quiet comedy. Imagine Vikings proudly offering mead, their favored drink, gently hoping to impress their new friends. But perhaps the native individuals politely sipped, exchanged quiet glances, and then subtly set their cups aside, deciding it tasted suspiciously like spoiled fruit. Vikings, meanwhile, quietly wondered if their guests simply had delicate palates. Despite these gentle misunderstandings, both groups found ways to communicate softly through shared activities, perhaps gathering around fires, observing each other's storytelling traditions, even gently laughing together despite language barriers. These moments revealed common humanity, universal gestures, shared laughter, mutual curiosity, softly bridging the gaps between vastly different worlds. And, though later encounters between Europeans and indigenous peoples elsewhere in the Americas would become tragically violent, these initial Viking interactions remained gently peaceful, cautious, and respectfully distant. Historians quietly debate why Vikings didn't establish permanent relationships, perhaps logistics, cultural differences, or simply a desire to avoid complicating their already peaceful lives. But these early encounters were characterized by genuine curiosity rather than conflict. Tonight, as your ship gently carries you forward, perhaps you feel comforted by this quietly hopeful image. Vikings, fierce warriors famed for conquest, choosing instead gentle curiosity, cautious smiles, and polite misunderstandings over immediate hostility. Picture yourself softly witnessing these moments, the cautious approach, awkward first gestures, quiet laughter over small confusions, and the gentle warmth of human connection, bridging vast cultural divides. Allow yourself to drift closer to sleep, comforted by the quiet reminder that even fierce Vikings could sometimes find themselves gently awkward, carefully, polite, and charmingly human. Tonight, your journey mirrors theirs, a peaceful voyage filled with gentle exploration, quiet discoveries, and softly whispered conversations bridging gaps of understanding. Close your eyes, smiling gently at history's quiet humor, softly guiding you toward restful dreams. As your gentle voyage continues beneath a sky softly lit by stars, imagine yourself quietly standing by the Viking campfire, where the subtle comedy of early cross-cultural trade unfolds. The Vikings and their newfound native friends, having cautiously navigated first encounters, now softly approach each other with mutual curiosity, eagerly and somewhat awkwardly attempting to trade. Picture yourself watching as Vikings, with hopeful smiles, unpack an odd assortment of goods they considered valuable: iron nails, colorful glass beads, intricately carved bone combs, displaying them like proud shopkeepers at an impromptu market stall. On the other side, indigenous traders quietly present neatly stacked animal pelts, expertly crafted bows, and bundles of aromatic herbs, their offerings both practical and intriguing to the Vikings. Historians continue gently debating exactly how well these early trades went, though it's safe to say they weren't without amusing confusion. Imagine a Viking proudly offering a gleaming iron nail, silently convinced it was a precious gift, only to watch politely puzzled natives graciously accept it with a smile, quietly wondering, is this tiny piece of metal meant to be decorative or useful? Similarly, the Vikings occasionally found themselves unsure about their acquisitions. Perhaps one sailor happily traded a precious iron tool for a bundle of herbs, only to later realize he'd accidentally bartered for something whose main use was seasoning fish. He wasn't very good at catching anyway. Imagine his gentle embarrassment, quietly admitting to fellow sailors that perhaps his trading skills weren't exactly sharp. Misunderstandings occasionally became gently humorous. Consider the quietly amusing scenario where a Viking attempts a complicated gesture intended to communicate, "This metal object is very useful," but inadvertently conveys something closer to, "Please take this because I don't know what else to do with it." Both sides politely smiled, neither entirely sure what had just been communicated, yet mutually deciding it was best to simply nod appreciatively and accept whatever strange object was offered. Despite these quiet confusions, trade proved genuinely beneficial for both sides. Vikings discovered the warmth and comfort of well-made fur garments, something they greatly appreciated given their usual climate back home. Meanwhile, indigenous peoples recognized practical uses for Viking metal goods, incorporating nails and small iron objects into their own tools, or simply using them decoratively. Both groups gradually became gently familiar with each other's preferences, learning over time what items would genuinely appeal or quietly amuse their trading partners. Occasionally, these interactions revealed charmingly quirky differences. Imagine Vikings proudly displaying their favorite objects such as finely crafted wooden bowls or carved bone dice, and enthusiastically demonstrating their uses like eating or playing games. Their native counterparts politely watched these demonstrations, perhaps quietly amused that these supposedly tough warriors spent so much effort crafting tiny objects simply for entertainment or convenience. One gently amusing anecdote mentioned in sagas and stories describes Vikings offering brightly colored cloth, convinced their guests would admire its vibrant hues. However, the indigenous traders seemed politely unimpressed, perhaps wondering why Vikings valued something that seemed useful, primarily for attracting attention, a trait generally unwise in hunting. You might picture the gentle bafflement as Vikings quietly realized their colorful textiles were about as useful to their new friends as fishing nets were to a Viking who couldn't fish. Yet these awkward moments rarely diminished genuine goodwill. In fact, both groups seemed softly amused by each other's occasional misunderstandings. Imagine evenings around the fire, Vikings gently chuckling as they recounted humorous trade incidents, perhaps one warrior jokingly reminding another about the day he proudly traded away valuable metal for what turned out to be nothing more than pleasantly scented grass. Meanwhile, native peoples likely shared quiet laughter over their own amusing observations, perhaps gently teasing a friend who had mistakenly accepted an object whose purpose remained a mystery. These gentle jokes revealed something profound. Both Vikings and indigenous peoples, despite their vast differences, shared a universal appreciation for quiet humor and subtle comedy found in the small misunderstandings of everyday life. Historians still gently debate exactly why trade relationships remained sporadic and limited. Some suggest logistics made sustained trade challenging, while others argue cultural differences simply limited long-term connections. Still, those brief moments of gentle interaction remind us of the quietly comforting truth that humans, whether Vikings or indigenous, share a fundamental desire to connect even when language and culture create gently humorous barriers. Tonight, as your ship softly carries you forward under the peaceful glow of the stars, perhaps you quietly smile at these charming images: burly Vikings awkwardly offering shiny nails, indigenous traders politely accepting them, while subtly exchanging amused glances, and evenings spent gently laughing over small, harmless misunderstandings. Let your mind drift softly toward sleep, comforted by the gentle reminder that even fierce warriors occasionally found themselves quietly baffled, gently amused, and charmingly human. Perhaps your journey tonight mirrors theirs, a peaceful voyage marked not by conquest or conflict, but by quiet connections, gentle misunderstandings, and softly whispered laughter, bridging vast divides. Close your eyes, feeling comforted and gently amused, drifting peacefully toward restful dreams. The gentle rhythm of the waves beneath your Viking nar continues to soothe your senses, lulling you deeper into the quiet comforts of history. Tonight, picture yourself calmly observing the Vikings as they quietly construct their very first longhouse in Vinland. Far from dramatic battles or heroic deeds, this activity reveals a pleasantly mundane, even quietly humorous side of these famed explorers. As you imagine the peaceful shores of Vinland, envision the Vikings carefully selecting a suitable site for their new home, preferably somewhere flat, sheltered from the wind, and close enough to water for convenience, but not so close they risk waking up with wet feet. There's something gently amusing about picturing these hardened warriors politely debating the finer points of medieval real estate. Perhaps one sailor softly argues for a spot near the stream, while another gently insists it's too marshy, quietly reminding his crewmates that soggy boots are no way to start a day. Eventually, a decision is quietly reached, and construction begins in earnest. Now, Viking longhouses are impressive structures, but building one isn't exactly a glamorous job. Imagine warriors famed for conquest quietly carrying timber, methodically stacking stones, or softly grumbling about the tedium of thatching roofs. Even legendary heroes, it seems, had to occasionally pause and ask, "Does this log look straight to you?" Historians gently debate exactly how skilled Vikings were as craftsmen. While they undoubtedly produced sturdy, reliable buildings, there's also evidence suggesting their carpentry occasionally bordered on the charmingly amateurish. Picture Vikings carefully positioning wooden beams, stepping back to admire their handiwork, only to discover something quietly but obviously crooked. The gentle comedy of these moments must have been irresistible burly warriors quietly sighing, mildly annoyed at the slightly lopsided doorway they'd just created. Yet, despite these amusing imperfections, the longhouse gradually took shape, becoming a cozy, welcoming refuge from Vinland's gentle elements. Imagine walking softly into the finished structure, a spacious hall, the scent of fresh timber mingling with wood smoke beams gently creaking overhead, and warm firelight flickering invitingly in the central hearth. Benches line the walls, covered in soft furs, creating comfortable spaces, ideal for quietly relaxing after a day's gentle toil. Of course, no Viking construction project was without minor mishaps. Picture the quietly humorous scene of one warrior enthusiastically hammering nails, only to accidentally trap his cloak beneath a plank. Imagine his gentle embarrassment as his crewmates pause to politely suppress laughter, softly teasing him with gentle jokes for days afterward. Quiet reminders like, "Are you free to help or still nailed down?" Similarly, roofing the longhouse provided ample opportunities for gentle comedy. Thatching required bundles of grass or reeds skillfully woven together, a meticulous job that often tested Viking patience. Imagine burly warriors quietly attempting this delicate task, only to realize midway through they'd somehow woven their own sleeves into the thatch. These moments probably elicited softly amused chuckles from fellow builders, creating a charming camaraderie around minor mistakes. Historians also quietly debate how the Vikings adapted their construction techniques to Vinland's unfamiliar resources. While timber was abundant, its quality and properties differed subtly from European varieties. Picture Vikings softly scratching their heads, quietly debating whether certain wood was strong enough, gently joking that perhaps their longhouse might become more of a short house if they chose poorly. Despite these gently amusing challenges, Vikings proved adept at making comfortable homes. Longhouses offered warmth, shelter, and a welcoming atmosphere ideal for peaceful evenings spent around the hearth, quietly recounting the day's minor victories and amusing mishaps. Imagine yourself sitting beside a gentle fire, hearing Vikings softly joke about construction hiccups or playfully teasing crewmates whose carpentry skills left room for improvement. Inside the longhouse, everyday comforts prevailed. Simple wooden tables provided spaces for leisurely meals, benches covered in furs invited relaxed conversation, and sturdy chests held treasured belongings, perhaps including items gently acquired through trade with indigenous peoples whose uses might still quietly puzzle the Vikings. Picture the softly humorous sight of a warrior proudly displaying a carefully crafted chest, only to quietly admit he still had no idea what half its contents were meant for. Longhouses also offered spaces for quieter pursuits, gentle storytelling, careful craftsmanship, or simply lounging comfortably after a long day. Picture Vikings quietly carving decorative objects, softly singing traditional songs, or perhaps gently debating how to improve their roof's questionable thatching technique. These peaceful activities revealed the quietly comforting truth. Even fierce Vikings cherished calm evenings, simple joys, and gently humorous conversations. Tonight, as your ship continues gently rocking beneath starry skies, perhaps you appreciate this quiet side of Viking life, the subtle comedy of imperfect construction, the gentle camaraderie formed around minor mishaps, and the peaceful comforts of a well-built yet charmingly flawed home. Your journey mirrors theirs, a voyage marked not by epic battles, but by cozy evenings, quiet conversations, and softly amusing moments that remind us history's greatest figures were, above all, charmingly human. Feel yourself drifting peacefully toward sleep, comforted by the gentle thought that even legendary warriors occasionally struggled with slightly crooked doorways, tangled thatch, and softly humorous construction mishaps. Close your eyes, gently smiling at history's quiet comedy, softly guiding you toward restful dreams. As your ship gently rocks under a blanket of stars, the cold northern wind softens into a calm breeze, and your thoughts drift to the coziest moments of Viking life in Vinland. Picture it now. Winter is settling over the land, but here in the modest longhouse, warmth glows from the hearth, flickering gently against the timber walls. You're wrapped in furs, cradling a bowl of something warm, and outside the snow falls in slow, whisper-soft flurries. Unlike the bitter howling winters of Greenland or Iceland, Vinland's winters, at least the first few they experienced, felt noticeably gentler. Historians still gently argue whether the climate of the area was unusually mild during that specific period, or if the Vikings were simply comparing it to their usual icy torment. Either way, it allowed them to enjoy a slower, calmer rhythm of life, one that leaned into storytelling, simple routines, and very relaxed expectations. Imagine the day shrinking early into twilight, and inside the longhouse there's no urgency, no pressing chores, no looming threats, just the crackling of the fire, the scent of wood smoke mingling with simmering stew, and the quiet sound of a crewmate gently snoring near the wall. It's the kind of environment where even the most seasoned warrior can take a break from swinging axes and instead focus on the far nobler art of napping. Evenings like these were made for stories. One Viking, perhaps the unofficial storyteller of the group, sits up straighter, warming his hands on the fire, preparing to share a tale. But don't expect epic battles or gods hurling thunderbolts tonight. No, these stories are softer, gently humorous recollections of past voyages, odd encounters, or small moments that became legendary through sheer repetition. You might hear the tale of a man who once mistook a bear for a fellow crewmate, or the saga of the time someone cooked an entire pot of stew without realizing they forgot the meat. And, of course, there's always Fishless Sven, the unofficial hero of campfire comedy. Tonight's story might be the one where he proudly returned to camp with a suspiciously heavy net, only to reveal he'd hauled up nothing but mud and a single, very confused frog. Laughter not loud or raucous, but soft and sincere, fills the room as others contribute their own memories, gently ribbing each other with affection that only comes from months of living shoulder to shoulder. You imagine the light from the fire dancing across the wooden beams, casting long shadows that shift like ghosts of the past, wrapping the room in a flickering embrace. The wind outside taps softly at the walls, but no one worries. Inside, it's warm. Inside, it's safe. Even the ships tied up at the shoreline seem to rest. Vikings weren't always running off into the wilderness for new conquests. They appreciated downtime just like anyone else. Winters were for mending sails, repairing gear, maybe even quietly whittling a gift for someone back home, though you'd never catch them admitting that aloud. By day, they might go out for brief foraging or to check traps, but most of the season was about conserving energy, telling stories, eating well, and not slipping on the ice. Historians believe these quiet winters were likely part of what made Vinland so appealing, its relative ease compared to the relentless harshness of Greenland. Here, they could live a little more comfortably, which is saying something for people used to eating frozen fish in the dark for 6 months. The simple pleasure of not constantly battling snowdrifts probably felt like a luxury spa retreat by comparison. And while the Vikings of Vinland didn't celebrate Christmas as we know it, they did have Yule, a winter festival involving feasting, storytelling, and gift-giving. You might imagine them toasting with wooden mugs, raising them toward the timber ceiling in quiet cheers to the gods and to each other. Not every night was full of mirth, but even on the darkest evenings, a flicker of warmth, both literal and emotional, lit their world. You're reclining now, your fur-lined cloak pulled up to your chin, your head gently resting on a bundle of linen. The fire has faded to coals glowing gently like stars on the floor, and only a few sleepy murmurs remain in the room. Maybe someone mumbles the ending of a story or gently snores mid-thought. The longhouse is quiet, now filled with the kind of silence that hums with comfort, not absence. This isn't the Viking history you learned in school: loud battles and long beards swinging axes. No, this is the version few people talk about, the slow winter months of doing absolutely nothing dramatic, just resting, laughing, sharing meals and stories, taking time to live. And isn't that what we all crave sometimes? As your ship glides ever forward into the gentle waters of sleep, let this image settle around you, a snow-covered world outside, glowing warmth within, and a circle of quiet souls simply trying to make it through winter, together one story and one bowl of stew at a time. Let your breath slow. Let the imagined warmth of the fire wrap around you. You're safe in Vinland tonight, where winters are calm, stories are cozy, and even the warriors have bedtime routines. The warmth of that flickering longhouse fire slowly fades as morning returns to Vinland, and with it, a gentle restlessness. You rise with the Vikings stretch softly beneath the low beams and begin to notice something subtle in the air. Not just the usual smoke and pine-sweet breeze, but something emotional, the first signs of homesickness. Imagine for a moment being far from everything familiar. Your family, your fields back in Greenland or Iceland, the feel of your own bed, or at least the familiar pile of fur that passed for one. While Vinland had proven fertile and peaceful, something about it quietly gnawed at the Vikings. It wasn't danger or famine or even weather. It was the simple weight of absence. An absence like winter can settle over a camp, slowly blanketing it in stillness. Some historians suggest that homesickness played a significant role in why the Norse never fully committed to colonizing Vinland. Of course, scholars still debate the exact reasons, whether it was strained relations with local peoples, logistical difficulties in getting supplies, or a lack of willing settlers. But one thing seems certain: the longing for home began to echo quietly through the longhouse halls. You might picture a Viking staring absently into a bowl of stew, stirring slowly without eating. His companion quietly asks if he's feeling unwell. He shrugs and mumbles something about missing his wife's barley cakes. Another sits by the shore, watching the tide roll in, fingering a carved pendant shaped like his family's horse emblem. They don't speak of it often, but the feeling grows soft, persistent, and quietly contagious. Even simple things trigger it. Someone mentions a funny saying from home, and the room chuckles, then grows quiet, as each person is pulled momentarily into memory. One crewmate dreams of their children's laughter. Another remembers the sound of church bells in a far-off Icelandic valley, echoing down the mountainsides. The longing isn't loud, it doesn't shout or weep. It's more like a draft that slips in under the door and wraps around your ankles. And yet amid this soft sorrow, life continues. The Vikings try to keep busy. They mend sails that haven't been used in months. They check on storage pits and sharpen axes, already plenty sharp. But there's a listlessness to their movements. They joke less, sit longer by the fire, and when one of them offhandedly says, maybe it's time to head back, no one disagrees. Some speculate that Leif Erikson himself never stayed long in Vinland. He may have returned to Greenland after just 1 or 2 seasons, leaving others behind for a while. If true, you can almost hear the subtle shift in camp after he's gone. A bit more silence, a bit less certainty. Leadership like firelight fades quietly when it disappears. But not all homesickness was sad. Sometimes it sparked gentle conversations. Picture them gathered again around the hearth, not trading sagas of gods or giants this time, but simpler, sleepier tales of sheep getting stuck in fences or old uncles who snored so loudly they scared the goats. There's something heartwarming about those quiet recollections, like bedtime stories from grown warriors to each other, keeping homes alive in memory. Still, the longing remained, and it crept into their routines. Their explorations became shorter, their repairs more meticulous, as if subconsciously preparing for departure. The longhouse itself, once the project of enthusiasm and hope, now looked less like a home and more like a well-maintained guest house. Ready for closure, but not quite abandoned. One can almost hear it in their daily rhythms. Less laughter, fewer new fishing spots explored, no more ambitious attempts to expand the settlement. And at night, that same fire flickers quietly. But the stories have changed. Now, they're remembering, not discovering. They speak of fjords and hills back home, of neighbors and festivals. The present slowly dissolves into the comfort of the past. Historians note that no large Viking family groups ever moved to Vinland. It remained a place for expeditions, not emigration. And perhaps that was the real issue. You can grow food in new soil, but it's harder to grow roots. No matter how green the meadows or sweet the berries, they didn't carry the comfort of familiarity, the lived-in scent of one's home longhouse, the texture of known paths beneath one's feet. So as you lie softly in your imagined bunk tonight, feel the quiet pull of home, as they must have felt it, not as desperation, but as a slow, familiar ache. A sense of knowing where you belong, even while resting in a place of beauty and peace. And perhaps that gentle ache is what finally shifted their hearts. Your journey tonight has been rich in discovery, but now it mirrors theirs in reflection. As the stars stretch overhead and the wind brushes your face, allow yourself to feel the stillness that settles over a people quietly realizing they were never meant to stay. Sometimes even paradise can feel a little too far from home. And so, as they prepare softly without fanfare to return across the ocean, let yourself settle too. The fires in Vinland burn low, not because they were failures, but because they had served their season, their purpose, their peaceful chapter in a long, loud saga. Close your eyes now and follow that quiet yearning, not out of sadness, but into comfort, the kind that whispers softly of your own pillow, your own space, your own place in the world. The decision to leave Vinland doesn't happen with a speech or a great cry shouted into the forest air. No dramatic sail-raising ceremony, just quiet preparations, slow, thoughtful movements. A knotted rope tightened here, a bundle of fur quietly folded there. One by one, the Vikings begin readying their departure, not with urgency, but with a soft sense of closure, the kind of feeling you get at the end of a restful weekend, away when you gently pack your bag, double-check under the bed, and leave the cabin just as you found it. You might imagine Leif's crew standing at the edge of the longhouse one last time, looking back with a small, wistful smile. They came here with curiosity and courage, and now they leave with stories and perhaps a few extra laugh lines. The longhouse, which once echoed with laughter and the occasional muffled complaint about fishless Sven's latest catch, or lack thereof, falls silent. Historians suggest the Norse returned in small waves rather than all at once. Some lingered a bit longer, reluctant to part with Vinland's calm meadows and gently swaying trees. Maybe a few even hesitated, standing at the shoreline, caught between two worlds, one of peaceful abundance and another of familiarity and family. But eventually each chose the sea again, retracing the watery path that once led them to this gentle new world. The physical departure was quiet, but emotionally layered. Before setting sail, they carefully buried or stored what they couldn't carry. Tools, extra timber, even fishing gear, tucked away beneath stones or inside hollowed logs, as if leaving breadcrumbs for some imagined return. You might picture them pausing at the base of a tall spruce carving initials or a quiet symbol into the bark. Not a grand claim of ownership, just a nod, a memory etched in wood, saying softly, "We were here." They repaired their ships with care, patching sails, inspecting hulls, making sure everything was seaworthy. No one rushed. Each task was done with the tender thoroughness of people who've been given time to think. As the final days in Vinland passed, their routine slowed. Meals became longer, evenings stretched into late-night talks, voices soft firelight flickering across faces deeply tanned by sun and sea. And just as they'd arrived gently, they departed the same way. Imagine the soft scraping of hull against sand, the whisper of sails unfurling in the morning wind, the gentle creak of wood as the ships pushed off into the waves. No trumpets, no crowd, just the ocean welcoming them back into its rhythm and Vinland watching quietly from the shore, mist settling over the empty fields. Historians still gently debate how many times the Vikings returned after that first voyage. Some believe they made several trips bringing timber and supplies back to Greenland, while others argue they gradually abandoned the idea. But one thing's certain, their presence never grew beyond a handful of houses and softly trodden footpaths. Vinland never became a second homeland. It remained a gentle chapter in their story, brief and beautiful. Imagine walking the overgrown trails they once walked long after they'd left. The longhouse now softened by time, its walls returning to the earth. The fire pit filled with leaves, maybe a single iron nail glinting beneath the moss. The forest slowly reclaiming what had been borrowed. Nature with its patient hand gently erasing footprints, but never quite forgetting. And isn't that the way of so many human moments, big enough to matter, small enough to fade quietly? The Vikings, for all their fierceness, seemed to understand that. They didn't build monuments here. They didn't name mountains after themselves or try to conquer the land. They came, they lived, they laughed, and then they left like guests who respected the host enough to wash the dishes before heading home. You might imagine one of the last men aboard the final ship looking back as the coastline faded into the sea mist, not with sadness, but a sort of peaceful gratitude, the kind of feeling you get when you realize you've had just enough of something good to remember it fondly forever. As your own ship glides quietly forward tonight, retracing their return voyage, allow yourself to feel the calm they must have carried. Not the thrill of new discovery, but the soft satisfaction of knowing when something beautiful has run its course. Vinland had been kind. It had offered peace, laughter, and full bellies. It had reminded them that even warriors need rest. Even explorers need to sit still sometimes and watch the light shift through the leaves. So they left it not with regret, but with reverence. Let that feeling settle around you, now the sense of something completed, not lost. That warm fullness you feel when the last chapter closes just right. As the imagined sails fill with wind and the horizon slowly shifts, let yourself rock with the waves, comforted by the thought that not all goodbyes have to hurt. Some are simply soft exits, the kind you whisper rather than shout. Close your eyes. The longhouse is behind you. The ocean lies ahead. And between the two, only memory gently folded and carried home. As your ship glides smoothly across the open sea, carrying you gently away from Vinland, your mind turns to the curious way stories live on. Because even though the Vikings left those quiet shores behind the memory of their time, there didn't disappear. It simply slipped into legend. It curled into sagas, whispered into firelight, retold by grandparents whose parents had only heard rumors. And, like all good bedtime tales, parts of it were true, parts were forgotten, and parts, well, historians are still debating those. You might imagine sitting beside a Viking elder years later, back in Greenland or Iceland, where the winters are darker and the fire is the only light in the room. Children sit cross-legged, wide-eyed as he leans forward and begins, "When I was younger, I sailed farther than any man had before, to a land with grapes on the vine trees, taller than towers, and fish that practically leapt into your lap." A few of those details, as you know, may be gently exaggerated, but the core of the story, that was real. The Vikings really did reach the shores of North America 5 centuries before Columbus ever convinced anyone to fund his little cruise. The Norse sagas, particularly the Saga of the Greenlanders and Saga of Eric the Red, record these quiet adventures wrapped in that cozy mix of fact and storytelling that makes them feel like a warm blanket on a cold night. And yet, for centuries, many doubted these tales. Surely it couldn't be true. Surely those poetic stories of Vinland were just Viking bedtime stories exaggerated to entertain or impress. After all, how could people with no maps and Raven-based GPS have found their way to a new continent? Historians still argue whether the sagas are purely oral history passed down through generations, or if they're poetic reconstructions layered with metaphor and embellishment. Some claim they're accurate down to the number of boats. Others believe the whole thing is a patchwork of different journeys stitched together into a single dreamy voyage to a semi-mythical place. But then something quietly remarkable happened. In the 1960s, an archaeological site was unearthed in Newfoundland, Canada, at a place called Lulls Meadows. Beneath grassy mounds and scattered stones, researchers discovered clear signs of Norse settlement, timber-framed houses, iron nails, even a small forge for making tools. It was as if the long-lost whispers of the sagas had floated across the sea and rooted themselves quietly in the soil. No grand Viking hall, no buried longships, just the humble remains of people trying to build something, trying to live. And suddenly, those old stories felt different. Not myths, but memories. You might smile softly at the thought. Imagine the satisfaction of that moment of realizing that what was long dismissed as fiction had a foundation in truth. It's like finding a photo album of a dream you once had and realizing it really happened. The quiet, unassuming kind of historical proof that doesn't shout but simply sits there and says, "Told you so." Still, Lulls Meadows raises more questions than it answers. Was it Vinland, a seasonal outpost, a trading camp, Historians gently argue about the scale and purpose of the settlement. Was it just a stepping stone, a pit stop on the way to something greater that never came? Or was it the full extent of Norse ambitions, an attempt tested then tucked away? And what about the indigenous peoples? There's evidence that contact occurred, shared objects, similar tools, and oral histories that may contain hints of strange visitors from the sea. But no grand records remain. Like the Vikings, the native peoples of the area may have chosen to quietly forget, or perhaps simply absorb the memory into their own stories in ways outsiders can't decode. What we do know is that history, like sleep, is full of shadows and half-light. Not everything is clear, not every question is answered, but there's a calm beauty in that too. Because stories don't need to be perfect to be true, sometimes they just need to be remembered. So tonight, as you drift deeper into sleep, feel the gentle comfort of knowing you're part of a long, quiet chain of remembering. The Norse may have left Vinland, but the story lingered soft as fog steady as tide, and eventually it found its way back into the light. Close your eyes and imagine the wind brushing through the grass atop those ancient ruins, the hush of waves nearby, and the faint, timeless echo of laughter of voices telling stories that once felt like myth and are now part of your journey. History, as it turns out, makes a pretty good bedtime story. Your ship sails gently now, carried by the same ocean winds that once bore Leif Erikson and his crew. But the coastline of Vinland lies far behind, and in its place is something even quieter: silence. The kind of silence that only comes when nature reclaims what humans leave behind. Vinland, once a bustling little Norse outpost of longhouses, fishing nets, and softly whispered stories, began to fade. Slowly, gently. Not with fire or flood, but with time. The meadows, once trodden by Viking boots, now rustle only under the hooves of deer. The paths that once echoed with quiet laughter are overgrown with moss. Even the longhouse, once the heart of warmth and chatter, surrenders piece by piece to the earth, timbers softening walls, slumping roof, sinking beneath layers of pine needles. There is something deeply calming about this return. Nature doesn't rush. It takes its time, smoothing out footprints, softening corners, and layering everything with silence. You might picture the forest inching in, not as a conqueror, but as a caretaker. Trees quietly reclaiming clearings, roots nudging through old fire pits, birds nesting where hammers once struck. Historians visiting sites like Lulls Meadows have to kneel close to the earth to spot what remains: small pieces of iron, a bit of charcoal impressions in the ground where walls once stood. Nothing dramatic, just faint whispers as if the land is saying, yes, they were here, but gently. This subtle fade is what makes Vinland so poetic. It wasn't lost in battle or buried in disaster. It was simply let go. And as you lie here, gently rocked by the rhythms of the sea, you may feel the quiet beauty of that truth. That sometimes the most touching stories aren't the ones that end in flame, but the ones that slip silently into memory. Imagine walking through that same land today. The trees have grown taller, the winds still carry salt from the sea, but no signposts point you to where the Vikings slept or told stories or stumbled over fishing lines. You'd have to look closely, maybe kneel down. Listen for the past in the hush between birdsong and breeze. The ruins don't tell their secrets loudly, they whisper. Historians still debate whether other Norse outposts were built and lost entirely, structures now buried beneath fields or forests, their timbers long decayed. Some believe there are traces scattered across the eastern coastline of North America, waiting to be gently uncovered. Others argue Vinland was always meant to be temporary, more of a question than an answer. But the forest doesn't argue. It just keeps growing, and so Vinland fades, not erased, but absorbed. Like a dream you remember vaguely in the morning, aware it meant something, even if the details are gone. It becomes part of the land, woven into the wind, whispered through the leaves. You may find peace in this, in the idea that not everything needs to last forever to matter, that some journeys are worthwhile, even if they don't leave monuments. The Vikings didn't build empires here. They didn't rename mountains or pave roads. They arrived, they lived, and they left. And that's enough. Tonight, your journey mirrors theirs. You came to this story not for conquest, but for comfort. to drift through gentle discovery, soft jokes, and sleepy tales of berry-picking warriors and longhouses built slightly crooked. And now, like them, you begin to retreat, not because it's over, but because it has fulfilled its purpose. So, imagine one last glimpse of Vinland's shore shrouded in morning mist. The water laps gently at the land, touching it, the way a hand brushes a sleeping child's forehead. The trees stand tall but quiet, watching, guarding, and within their trunks perhaps a memory lingers. Not all history echoes with trumpets. Some of it settles softly, like mist, like moss, like sleep. Let your breath slow. Let the hush of the forest wrap around you. You are leaving Vinland now, but Vinland is not leaving you. It's tucked gently into your thoughts, a lullaby of a lost place that never needed to be found again. The ocean stretches before you, now wide, calm, and endlessly blue. You're sailing away from a memory, not with haste, but with the peace that comes from knowing the story doesn't need to be bigger to be beautiful. The Vikings, too, knew that not all legacies are loud. Sometimes they're quiet steps on soft ground, a shared fire, a single moment of discovery that asks for nothing more than to be remembered gently. Years pass, then centuries, and for a long time no one thinks much about Vinland. The maps don't mark it. The world forgets the whispers carried on Viking ships. Other empires rise, other explorers sail west. Columbus, bold and utterly unaware, stumbles onto shores already gently touched by Norse boots 500 years earlier. You might picture Leif Erikson up in the quiet halls of Valhalla, watching the 1492 voyage with a soft chuckle. "Bit late to the party, aren't you?" he might mutter while sipping mead and still gently bragging about his berry wine from Vinland. But here on Earth, the rediscovery doesn't come through fanfare. It comes quietly, as most truths do. In 1960, two Norwegian archaeologists, Helge and Anne Stein Ingstad, walk along the windswept coast of Newfoundland. Local fishermen had pointed them toward grassy mounds long overlooked. Beneath those humps of earth, beneath centuries of moss and roots and silence, the past gently stirred. Lanso Meadows, as the site is known, became the first, and so far only confirmed Norse settlement in North America. Not a legend, not a bedtime story, real tangible proof. Iron nails, sockets for wooden beams, a smithy, a longhouse, small, humble, unmistakably Viking, just enough to confirm what the sagas had been whispering for 1,000 years. Historians at last began listening differently. What else might those sagas hold? Which details were metaphor and which were simple fact, wrapped in the poetry of memory? Of course, questions remain. Lanso Meadows was small. It may have been a staging post, a seasonal camp, a test that was never meant to become a colony. Some say it was abandoned because of conflict. Others say it was loneliness, or homesickness, or just the long, quiet truth that sometimes paradise is still not home. Still, the rediscovery opened something not just for historians, but for dreamers. Because if the Vikings made it across, if they built fires and homes and quietly lived in a forgotten corner of the world, what else might be true? What else have we gently misplaced, waiting to be remembered? Even now, researchers comb the shores of Nova Scotia, Newfoundland, and Labrador. They listen for echoes beneath the soil, for tools tucked beneath roots, for the soft sigh of ships long gone. They follow the sagas not as gospel, but as gentle trails through the fog of time. And perhaps that's the best way to approach all history, with curiosity, humility, and a willingness to accept that even forgotten things may leave behind quiet fingerprints. Tonight, your ship sails not only through water, but through story. You've traveled with warriors who accidentally became explorers, who built homes in distant lands, who laughed at fishing failures, and traded awkwardly with new friends. You've walked through meadows now lost to trees, warmed yourself by fires long extinguished, and listened to tales that lived in hearts far longer than in books. And perhaps most importantly, you've discovered that history can be slow, gentle, sleepy. It doesn't always roar. Sometimes it hums soft as a lullaby across the centuries. So before we reach the shore of sleep, one final whisper of gratitude to the Norse who made the journey and then quietly walked away, to the storytellers who kept their memories alive, and to you for sailing with them tonight. Let's bring the story to its final rest now with a wind down made for sleep. The ocean calms, The sails sag ever so slightly as the breeze softens. You're wrapped in a fur-lined cloak, lying on your back at the bottom of the ship. The stars shimmer above, but they feel further, now more dream than sky. Your thoughts are slower. You feel your breath rise and fall, like the waves, soft, steady, gentle. Around you, no one speaks. Even the creak of wood and flap of sails have quieted to whispers. The long house of your memory still stands somewhere behind you, but it's fading into the forest. The berries have ripened and fallen. The campfire smoke has drifted away. And the trees. They stand watch, tall and kind guardians of a story that never needed to be loud. All you hear now is the sea and your own quiet heart. This journey was not about conquering. It was about noticing, about listening to the little moments. A crooked beam, a laughing crewmate, the first bite of a fresh grape. That's where history lives, not in the noise, but in the pause. So pause now. Let the gentle rhythm rock you. Let the stillness wrap around you. You're no longer sailing, you're floating. No destination, no need to move. Just the hum of a story settling softly into sleep. Just like you.